Hello again. The world marked International Women's Day on Wednesday this week. That was the 8th of March. The promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women was in focus again. This is also true for this year's Commission on the Status of Women, which is underway in New York in the United States. This annual meeting every March addresses the widespread inequality, violence and discrimination against women worldwide. Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu is representing South Africa at the United Nations during this session. She's joining us now live from New York. Minister, good afternoon, Johannesburg time, and good morning, your time there in New York. Thank you very much for being with us here on ENCA this Friday afternoon. You've been speaking quite a bit around the United Nations this week, around issues of women in particular. But when it comes to this session, the Commission on the Status of Women, what has been your main message from South Africa as a South African woman?
Thank you very much, Dan, for the opportunity, and a very good afternoon to you all South Africans. And it's a very good morning to us. It's a freezing morning, actually, in New York, but we're here to do our work. And the message from South Africa, in short, it's about tracking progress, achievements, and challenges and gaps that we can relate to from a country perspective. But also, then we belong to the global world. And in this particular case, we belong to the African continent. And therefore, in as far as the status of women is concerned, we track ourselves also against other countries of the African continent, but we also engage with those members of the African continent in as far as progress in relation to women's empowerment.
Yeah, this year's celebration of International Women's Day on the 8th of March was under the hashtag Embrace Equity, but it was focused on innovation and highlighting the gap in the digital world between men and women, boys and girls, in all kinds of places. From a digital perspective, are you highlighting any gaps? Are you sharing there with the United Nations about your efforts in South Africa to make sure that innovation is top of mind in tackling gender equality?
Thank you very much, Dan. I also was happy to be following the previous speaker you had, who was also relating to technology, but in particular to artificial intelligence. Yes, from a South African perspective, if you recall, maybe you've been informed, the theme for this year is innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for achieving gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. Therefore, this platform, we had an opportunity to exchange what is happening from a South African perspective. It is one of the reasons why we had Minister Blade Nzimande here, who had to speak about education, science and technology in particular for women and girls. But also we had the Department of Communication and Technological Digitization, which was also represented here. They also were talking about South Africa's achievements and strides from an education point of view of what the Department of Education has been doing to encourage young girls and women in particular to take the subjects of science and technology, especially for the future, considering the fact that what will be needed towards the future and the jobs that will be needed in the future is more on the technological side. So as a South African delegation, we're able to share our policies, our approach, and the programs that we have, sometimes also in the coordinated efforts that we have in South Africa. And let me tell you, Dan, it was quite exciting on the side events that were hosted by South Africa, because when you are in the United Nations, you can also gauge or measure whether people take you seriously or not by your side events, which you host. Our side events were chock-a-block, were full, because it showed that a lot of people are very much excited in hearing what South Africa has to say in as far as innovation and technology is concerned.
Yeah, Minister, what more do you think can be done to enhance the participation and increase it in a very tangible way of girls in school to undertake, as you've said, science, technology, and engineering and mathematics, the STEM, let's call them the STEM subjects, because the gap is still very big today. I saw a stat the other day that 13% of girls in school, I mean, when they finish, will be in the STEM compared to 20-something% of boys. So the gap is still large. What more do you think can be done?
I think we should use the very 13% that you are talking about of the girls that have been able to make it. And may I say what was interesting was some of the NGOs that came here, they brought some of the young women who took up on STEM in particular, and they were able to speak for themselves and indicate how it was difficult, yes, for them, particularly the young women who live in rural settings, but also even in the townships, because then me and you know, when the children come out of school and they have to go home, there's very little in the home that really exposes them exactly to the subjects that they are doing at school. So the 13% that you are talking about, we need to use those as an example of how possible it is. That's my first approach. The second approach is about us, parents, caregivers, and everyone encouraging young girls to focus on them. Yesterday, we had a Nigerian actually who was speaking to the challenges they face, where young girls are told it's not important for them to take the STEM subjects because what are they going to do afterwards? They're not going to go to university like the boys do. And therefore, our view is that we must encourage young girls to take on those subjects. And it must start with the home, because that's where the grounding starts long before the child goes to school. And we must also focus on the primary schools. In fact, in my view, even pre-primary school at the level of creche, when children are going to the creches, which therefore means we must change what is happening at ECDs, particularly in our township and rural areas. We must have teachers in those schools who are going to be able to encourage the young girls and young children to really take those subjects very seriously, because you can't expect them to do that only when they go to university. We must create the ground right at the beginning, but it must also be encouraged from homes.
Are you satisfied with the role of the private sector in this space?
Not really, Dan, and I think that there is some bit of progress. You can see some of them, we are working with them, especially in the early childhood development. But I think they can do much more better, because it is not government that is doing business where these young people can be exposed at a floor level in terms of technology. They must do much better than that, because again, the government does not even have enough budget for that, even though I know our biggest budget goes to education. They must also participate and partner with government, partner with civil society, partner with NGOs, because there's a plethora of NGOs in South Africa who are willing, but in many instances, they are short of resources to do that. We call on the private sector to really partner with us here and not keep telling people, go to your government, let your government do it for you, because government in partnership with them will be much more impactful in making the necessary change.
Yeah, finally, Minister, how will you measure the South Africa's participation, the success of South Africa's participation at this year's Commission on the Status of Women? When you come back, you look back and says, because of 1, 2, 3, you believe it was a successful participation?
Firstly, let me just say that our participation is preceded by our ambassador here, who has been chairing some of these sessions for the past 2 years. Actually, there is a report that is going to be coming out in as far as this area of women empowerment, and we will judge it by us going back home and implementing the decisions that are taken here, because we belong to the global world, as we say. The only way the world can see that there is progress is when we have less and we end gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa, when we can enable women to decide on their lives, when we can enable more women in decision-making structures at all levels, not only from a point of view of government, but even in the private sector. When we come back next year, when we report back, we must be able to report progress against what the United Nations sets out for the entire world. And the entire world comes back to report. So far, I'm happy with the reporting that has been coming from South Africa. But of course, it is still a pain that every time we speak of some progress, we are reminded painfully about the gender-based violence and femicide and the killing of children in particular. This is where we need to focus on as a country.
Thank you very much for your time, Minister Lindiwe Zulu, Minister of Social Development, talking to us from New York at the United Nations, representing South Africa at this year's Commission on the Status of Women, which is